Hi. We have a guest today. His name is Ben, and he has created a Tourette podcast, where every episode is interviewing a person with Tourette syndrome. So far, episode 0, episode 1, and episode 2 are out. And on Friday, my episode will come out, so I'll be episode 3. I'd like to ask Ben a few questions, one of which is, well, what I would like him to tell us about the podcast.
So the Tourette's Podcast is, it's an on-the-record conversation between myself and somebody else who, like me, has Tourette syndrome, and we just kind of talk about it. How we've navigated life, social situations, our professional life, our earliest tics, what did our parents do about it? How did Tourette's shape us in our lives, and what decisions did we make to either confront and deal with Tourette's or let it kind of overtake us, like I sort of did with me. I've lived a closeted life in terms of Tourette's. I adopted a policy for myself where I thought that if I was open about having Tourette's, then I would be socially and professionally hamstrung based on the misconceptions that are out there about Tourette's and what people might, about some judgment that somebody might make about me that would hinder me in terms of finding a job or entering into a relationship or whatever, or making friends, or the same thing that everybody else with Tourette's thinks about. But I never get the opportunity to talk to other people who have Tourette's. Just not since I was a little kid have I done that, because in my adult life, I've just kind of walled myself away from that. And this podcast is about me kind of getting out from there. And when I find people to interview, I do find frequently that they are in the total same boat as me, where not fully and not roundly, but often people are closeted about it. They do worry what other people are going to think, and rightly so, because it does impact their lives. But at the same time, I'll also talk to other people like you, Melissa, who completely own it, and you don't let people get away with misjudging you. It's a really heroic thing, and it's really inspirational to me. And that's really what I want one of the takeaways to be for this podcast, is learning from people like you, but then learning from other people who are also kind of just like me, to where we can kind of talk through it and maybe think of a way to make our situation better if we can. Otherwise, let's just have a conversation about having Tourette's and what it's been like in our lives, and hopefully people who are listening can have a takeaway. Sorry, there's a train in the background. Can find some takeaways or things that they can relate to in their own lives. So that's the Tourette's Podcast. And as we speak, it's February 16th, 2018. And I dropped the first 2 episodes today, and the response has been overwhelming, really, really overwhelming. And I'm really grateful for that, and I'm grateful for your help too.
Second question: when and where can we find this podcast?
So the podcast comes out every Friday. It's weekly, and it lives at tourettespodcast.libsyn.com. Libsyn is Libsyn. That's the hosting site, tourettespodcast.libsyn.com. An easier way to go about it, it's on iTunes. Just look up Tourette's Podcast on iTunes. You'll find it there. The Google Play Store, your favorite podcast app, if it's Stitcher or TuneIn or Overcast or Chorus, or however you go about getting your podcasts, you should be able to find the Tourette's Podcast too. If that's not the case and you go somewhere and you can't find it, let me know so I can remedy that, because I want this podcast to be as accessible as it can possibly be. Somebody I interviewed actually brought up to me that it's possible somebody on the outside who doesn't have Tourette's will find this podcast and think it's going to be a big laugh because they understand the stereotype of Tourette's, and they're going to tune into this thinking they're going to hear, just this freight train of cursing and barking and just the extreme examples that we've seen portrayed, and not to belittle any extreme examples, because they are real for some people. There are people who are dealing with Tourette's in very severe ways, My case, again, I guess you could say it's mild plus, I guess is the way to say it. But I'm hoping that when people tune in and expect to hear something stereotypical, they end up hearing a meaningful conversation between two people about the challenges that they're facing in their lives and how they've navigated and negotiated all of that, and what they still hope to achieve. So that's something I think anybody can relate to. But I do think the primary audience is going to be people who do have Tourette's and do want to listen in on a conversation that they can relate to. So that's kind of the goal with it. But if somebody on the outside comes in and their impression has changed based on what they heard, that's amazing to me.
What inspired you to create this podcast?
The idea for a Tourette's-focused podcast had been in my mind for years. I have a journalism background and audio development background, and had the means to do something like this. And I do podcasting professionally for my day job, for my employer. But I assumed that something like this already existed. A Tourette's-focused podcast is like, of course, foregone conclusion that something like this already exists. But I couldn't find anything. When I finally sat down, and again, I had this in my mind for years, just assuming that, it's like, well, I don't need to do it. It already exists somehow. But when I finally sat down to look for it, couldn't find it. Please let me know if I've missed it, because I don't want to disenfranchise or duplicate or anything like that. I just couldn't find anything like this out there. So I made a Twitter profile and just started to make connections with people and float the idea of a podcast. And very, very quickly, fire hose speed, I was lining up interviews with people who said, like, we need something like this. I have a story to tell, and just the reason for doing this podcast showed itself. It developed itself along the way, and it's growing fast. Even today, being the first day of published episodes, the response has been, again, it's really been overwhelming, which means I'm kind of intimidated a little bit because I don't want to make any mistakes, and I want to get this right. But I'm so appreciative for how this has gone, and thanking people like you too, Melissa, for being a part of this. Thank you so much.
Ben, thank you for being on my channel. I would say thank you for coming, but there's no Ben here. So thank you for being on my channel. Thank you for having me for the next episode. It was a real pleasure. And you guys can find the links to the podcast in the description, as well as the Twitter and any other information needed in the description. Check it out. It's much needed. Like, it's refreshing, because seriously, there's never been anything like this, I think. So this is kind of breaching new territory. It's hello, fuck yeah. Tourette syndrome is it needs to be out there. And Ben, thank you for helping us get it out there.